Hello everyone, welcome to Leading with Agility, the show that uses the world around us to explore how leadership can be inspired by agility. As always, I'm your host Arif, and I'm joined by...
Myself, TK, the technical error generator.
Thanks, TK. Well, here we are kicking off a brand new season of the podcast. We're super excited to bring you season 2 of our show, and what an exciting season we think it's going to be. Starting with today's guest, who I'll introduce in a moment, we're going to be bringing you a lineup of amazing, insightful guests to help us really understand what agile leadership looks like in the real world. We've got CEOs, coaches, HR specialists, PhD researchers, and so many more. We just can't wait to share these stories with you. Really exciting times for our podcast at the moment. To kick off our brand new season today, we're joined by Magdelene Usikaro. Hello, Magdelene. Thank you for joining us. And to kick us off and to introduce you to all our wonderful listeners, would you mind sharing us a bit about yourself, your background, and we'll get started in today's episode.
Hello, good afternoon, Arif and TK. Thank you for inviting me to your show today. So my name is Magdelene Usikaro, and I am the founder and chief exec of a wonderful community charity called Music Relief Foundation.
Amazing. Great. And we're going to be talking about lots of leadership related stuff today. So I think just to help our listeners get a frame for today's conversation, would you like to share with us a bit about maybe your charity if you'd like, but also from the perspective of leadership and leading young people or young people in leadership, what does leadership mean to you?
What does leadership mean to me? That is a very, very good question. Everybody has their different views on what leadership is. For me, a good leader means having a servant heart. That's what leadership means to me, having a servant heart. And what do I mean by that? A leader is not a leader without having a right attitude, B, people that you're actually leading, and most importantly, 3, having an attitude that you know that even if you're wrong, you're able to accept that you are wrong and be willing to take correction. But most importantly, you're there to serve others. You are not there for yourself. That is what, for me, a good leader is. And so that's what leadership means. And so running a charity for almost 14 years and working with young people, it's about enabling them to understand that before they think of leading other people, they need to know how to lead themselves.
Beautiful.
And so for them to be able to lead themselves, they need to be true to themselves. You can lie to everybody else, but you cannot lie to yourself.
That's very succinct way of describing leadership. I love that. I love how you've captured this idea of leading yourself first, and also this idea of being humble, I suppose. No puns intended there, but applying humility in your leadership stance and knowing when you're wrong and reflecting, I suppose. TK, we talk a lot about reflecting, don't we?
Well, we believe that a leader, first of all, reflects, right? Because as you mentioned, Magdelene, it's just important to be able to understand your impact so you can serve better.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go on, Magdelene. I don't know if you wanted to respond to TK there, but
Yeah, no, it's very true. That's so true. Like I already said, you need to be able to understand who you are. So it's an inside out job. You start from the inside before you reflect outside. There's too many people out there who are pretending to be great leaders because maybe you're leading multi-global companies and you are the top chief exec, but that doesn't necessarily make you a leader. Can you lead yourself? Are you able to stand in front of yourself, in front of the mirror and look at yourself and lead yourself in an effective way? That is the question. And so that's why for me, it's about having that servant heart, being able to be humble, being able to understand that it's not about you.
So picking up on that servant heart point, it's funny because in our previous world, TK, we would have referred to something called servant leadership.
Indeed.
Coined by a chap named Robert Greenleaf. I don't know if Magdalene's, you're familiar with that person who came up with that term, but there's a bit of an overlap or synergy in the two around serving others as a way of leading those you're responsible for. But what I wanted to explore in your work and in your charity work, especially, how do you bring that to life with the young people you're working with, and how do they respond to it? And I think it would be lovely if you could paint a bit more of a picture for our listeners about the kind of work you do and why it's so transformational?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So, several things. First and foremost, I said we're a community charity. So we started off life as being a organization that was set out to work with teenage moms, because that's where the charity was birthed from. From my own personal experience of being a teenage mom almost 26 years ago. And 10 years later from that time, it was evident that I needed to do something combining music, which is my expertise, and then my experience of being a teenage mom, but not having a clue, but going out to that particular audience. And then as time went by, it became very clear that we couldn't just work with teenage moms. The sphere began to open up to say, okay, these girls didn't get themselves pregnant. There's somebody else in the mix. And even from that, looking at what affects young people, or what was affecting young people. Yeah, we know music is powerful and they resonate very well with music, but also we know that music is also a double-edged sword in terms of that music can be used as a catalyst against each other. But then as we began to move and evolve from that, we began to see that, okay, yes, there's music, but there's also other things as issues as youth violence, and specifically knife crime, issues with mental health, issues with domestic violence, maybe not necessarily from the young person, maybe sin in the family, and some other issues that began to come up from there. So the sphere of for services began to expand from that. So looking at it, so coming back to your question in terms of how am I effectively working with young people so that they understand their leaders? So looking at, when I talk about knife crime, I talk about one of our initiatives, which we launched back in 2017 called More Than Able. So that More Than Able was centered around the whole issue of youth violence, specifically knife crime, at the time that it was very rampant within the media and what was happening around us between 2017 and 2018. And working with a group of young people who actually were the catalyst for us going ahead to launch this initiative, it was clear that the way they were being portrayed in the media, it almost seemed as if it's either the young people were being the ones killing or the ones who were being killed. There was no other side to it. But these young people were like, no, it's not all young people who are like that. And they wanted to present a message that, you know what, we are not all like that. And what better way for them to be able to do so than through the platform of music? And so they used music as that opportunity to be able to express themselves. But in that process of time, whilst doing that, going to the studio to record the songs, it's never easy first working with young people, especially young people from different backgrounds and different opinions. But it was clear. One thing that was clear was that for you to be able to come out and sing a song, first and foremost, you need to analyze what it is you're saying. And second of all, you have to understand that you are doing this as an ambassador of the charity, because this particular group of young people, we class them as our ambassador. And we said to them, what does an ambassador do? When you think of the role of an ambassador, when an ambassador of the UK goes to any other country, he or she is not talking about himself. He's talking about the country that he's representing wherever he is. And so that's where we coin that whole ambassador. And looking at it from the young person's view is that understand within yourself that you have the power to lead. But before you can lead people effectively, you need to be able to lead yourself more so. It wasn't an easy phase, like I said, dealing with young people, but it was something that they began to understand later, because we had several services that we were providing to better support them in terms of being able to when we talk about youth violence, you talk about obviously the police, being able to relate with the police, building down those kind of bridges that were there between young people and police, looking at how they are able to relate with themselves, looking at how they're able to deal with any form of pressures that they find themselves in, and how best they can communicate.
Sorry, Magdalene, I didn't mean to cut you. And there's a breathless, long answer, but it was brilliantly capturing your passion and what you're doing. So you've beautifully done that. Thank you. But there was so many things that you said there. I just wanted to go back to and expand.
Sure.
Sorry. So this idea of ambassadorship, right? And I guess the intention with that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me that you want to generate some kind of responsibility of action, responsibility of the actions that these young people are involved in, and by doing that, you're creating this idea that they're an ambassador of their community, or I guess the people, their peers, the charity as well. How challenging can that be to get them to take that mantle on, and how do you overcome some of those barriers when you're working with them? Because I can imagine that there's going to be resistance, right? And
there's definitely resistance, because I like the word you use, challenging. It's about positive citizenship, but it's never an easy fest when you're trying to get young people to kind of stand out from the norm, because they go outside and they mix with their peers. And their peers are not necessarily getting the kind of support that they are getting. And so it's trying to understand. It's like mixing the oil and water. It doesn't mix. So it's trying to get them to understand that, listen, as an ambassador, what is required from you is X, Y, and Z. However, the reality of dealing with young people is that, listen, I understand that I'm ambassador, but it seems like I can only wear this hat when I come to the charity. But when I leave the charity, I'm myself. So it's that having to marry both and say, listen.
And I think what you're talking about is creating that environment within your sphere of influence, within the charity environment where you're working with them, to help them feel as safe as possible that they can take that role on, and maybe eventually take it on outside of the four walls of your music center, for example, something like that, right? You're trying to get it.
Definitely.
Is that a fair description of what you're trying to do?
Fair description. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. No, Tika, I don't know if you wanted to come in with any kind of observations.
What I
thoughts.
found very interesting, you know, and Magdalene, thank you for sharing all that. You know, it may be a bit on the side, but what I found very interesting is, you know, you've mentioned some heavy topics like violence and knife crime, which are obviously a reality for many people. But I think what caught my eye is when you've talked about the role of music, passion, and maybe maybe our listeners would find it too, is you said that music could be used in an adversarial fashion. And I can imagine that can also be used positively. So I'd love to hear more about that, because I guess it's a very unique perspective.
It's a very unique perspective. However, I don't know how unique it may be when you look at it. When we think of music in our day-to-day life, we think of it as something that is pleasing, something refreshing, something entertaining, something enjoyable, and that's what we think of. But when we look at it from the other side of things, music is a vehicle that carries a message. And the question is, what message is it carrying, and what does it conjure within us? So when we think back to in the late 60s, 70s, when there was a lot of division in terms of racial tension back in America, and songs like What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, and you think of that song, it's a wonderful song, but that song was written because of what the tensions that was rising at that time. But when we look at it over the course of time, it's not just at that period of time. Every generation has a genre that they use to be able to express themselves. So in the times that we're in now, especially with young people, drill music has become that genre that is being used. But sometimes when we see it in the news, it was classified as the catalyst to knife crime. But it's a genre. So just like classical music, it's a genre. However, the lyrics, the wording that the young people are using could then be used against or for. So we do not then totally blacklist the genre. We need to listen. So that's why I said that it can be used as a catalyst. So it can be a double-edged sword. And we've seen in the news, I remember reading a news article years back about two young people who said because listening to a particular genre of music, not drill music, but another genre, led them to killing a family, because they said the music spoke to them. So we need to understand that in as much as we love music, and music is a powerful tool, it can act in a double-edged sword manner as well.
And I think that I'm aware of where you're coming from, and I think for context to our listeners, that there have been some notable cases here in the UK where such music was used by prosecutors to jail and convict individuals for various crimes. So I know what you're referring to in terms of how it can be used against young people, sadly. I think there's a lot of backlash about that in some of the press reading that I've been doing as well on that same issues. So quite familiar. I think what's interesting is as you said, it's about the words being used from an inspirational point of view in order to inspire young people to, I suppose, achieve their dreams, their hopes, and get to wherever they want to in life. And I'm guessing in your work, that's what you want to focus on, or I'd imagine that's what you want to focus on. So again, I think going back to what we were talking about earlier is that motivating factor. How do you create that motivating factor for young people when you're working with them or your team is working with them to turn all of that into a positive challenge, to use those lyrics or write the right music in a way that can motivate them to achieve their own dreams? How do you do that? What's the special ingredient at Music Relief?
The special ingredient is getting to know them. It's developing a rapport with them, because young people want to know that you actually have their back.
Yeah.
They don't want to. That's why many of them are not doing so well in schools. Not because the schools are failing. It's just because they feel that the adults in the school are not taking time to get to know them, and they're being shouted at all the time. Get to know the young person, understand what they like and what they don't like, and once over the course of time, once a relationship has been built and you've developed a rapport with them, the walls that are around them begins to fall. So it's never going to be a smooth sailing thing. It's never one size fits all. But the key thing for us, and has worked for us, is that having to build a relationship with them, and you get to find out what they like. And most of the time with these young people, I want to make things right for my mom. And I'm reminded of this in terms of some of the songs that the young people recorded. It's on our YouTube channel. One particular song says Road to Success. And the whole idea of Road to Success is that, as you talk about inspirational, it's about doing right for themselves, but more so for mom. They want to do right. They're going to go back and make sure they're focused, and they're going to go to university to get things right, so that way they are off the road. They're not doing bad things. They're actually trying to achieve something great for themselves and ultimately for mom as well. So it's about that relationship.
I love where you started from, about getting to know them and treating them as peers maybe, or as human beings who have needs and desires, and respecting, those needs and desires, and helping them achieve it. When we're going back to the, our discussion at the beginning around leadership, it's funny because I think I'm listening to that. TK, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but me listening to that, it sounds very familiar. Like, when we're working with leaders or working with teams of people, it always boils down to, doesn't it, relationships, human connection, as a way of getting the best out of each other. And we talk about that with the leaders we work with, around how they can create the right relationships with their employees so that they can build from there.
We absolutely do, yeah. But I think what Magdelene is also talking about here, which is another parallel for me, which is speaking the language of the person that really you're trying to reach.
Yes.
The language of value for some corporate leaders, but for the young leaders that Magdelene is working with, the language of music, right? And I think this is quite interesting.
Yeah, it is. I think it's a powerful mechanism. But it's because, I suppose, as you said, TK, that's a medium, right? Excuse me, I should use the word medium, not mechanism. It's a powerful medium. It's a medium that young people are familiar with, they relate to, they can understand, but it's a gateway to get to understand who they are, and not misunderstand them.
Good point.
Yeah, I think, as you look ahead and you look at, young people generally, in terms of, as I said, hopes, desires, and dreams, and getting them out into a place where they can achieve them. How do you set them up for, Magdelene? How do you set them up so that they can really fulfill their own leadership potential further down the line? And as you do that, have you got any notable examples of young people you worked with who've taken on maybe some leadership positions, whether it's community or organizations, or whatever field it might be in? I think it'd be nice to hear some stories of the impact of the work you've done.
How do you
Or you
set
do?
them up? I love these questions.
Yeah.
For me, it comes easy. Involving them in the discussions, involving them in the conversations that you're having. So taking it back to several examples, 2020, just before the lockdown, we had an event in the Royal Society of Arts building in Charing Cross, and it was called Youth Culture, Who Holds the Narrative? And we had two of the ambassadors who were part of the panelists. And the question was set out to the other panelists who were the adults there, but also more so to the young people. You tell us, what are you saying? What are you saying? And so it was powerful to see them on the stage speaking as co-guests of that
Right.
event, talking about what it is that they see as young people and what youth culture, when we talk about youth culture, what really is. But also we know that 2020, apart from the lockdown, it was a year that had so many discussions. You're either in one field or the other field. And so we, especially around the whole Black Lives Matter and I've come in from the death of George Floyd. And I remember I had, personally had monthly meetings with them online, and we would talk about these discussions and what their thought process is. So it was kind of split in the camp. So we had some of the young ladies there saying, "Oh, we're very pro it," and they actually went out for the marches, and the young men were actually saying, "No, they didn't go, and they didn't see it as something that they needed it to be part of." One actually surprised me, and he said, "Oh, I feel like this is not something that I should be involved with, because I feel like I need to still ensure that I am able to relate with my own neighbor on the street, not necessarily my next door neighbor, but people that I see, and love them, rather than going out there and saying, oh, Black Lives Matter. If I'm not loving my neighbor on the streets, how am I going to go out and be talking about the whole bandwagon?" This is an opinion of a 15-year-old boy at that time. And that surprised me, because I was expecting something different. I was expecting him to talk just like the girls were saying. And so the idea of involving the young people into topical discussions that you think that, oh, maybe it's over their head, is very important, because that way you hear from them, you hear their perspective, you actually hear what's actually going through their mind, which is important, because when you create an environment that the young person can open up to you, it's powerful, because that way they begin to tell you things that you would not have thought of, and they begin to bring out a different perspective. Just last week, this past 3 weeks, 2 weeks ago, last week, and even this week as we speak, we've had a series of young people coming in for work experience. So last week we had another young man come in, and we were talking about, and we're having a meeting. I assigned him a piece of work to do, set him up in the activity room to do the work. But then I was having a meeting with a member of the team, and we were talking about our social media. And I called him, I said, "Come and join us in this discussion." And he came and he sat down quietly for a while, and then listening to what we were saying. And then he began to add his input, and he said, "Oh, I didn't know what a meeting was. I thought a meeting is only for when you're in school." And it's a 14-year-old boy. When you're in school and the teachers are just talking, I didn't know that you can actually have an input in a meeting. I didn't know that I could actually talk in a meeting. And his points were very valuable in terms of saying it from a young person's point of view, to see, okay, this is what you should do, and this is how you guys can better ensure that your digital marketing campaign is effective. And so I think his point, which is very valid.
It's beautiful how you've articulated. I think for me, listening to that, which is the potential is there, it exists, it's just latent, it's underneath and needs to be revealed, and you're clearly creating a space where it helps to reveal that, and you're doing that by treating them as equals in some way, aren't you? They're just people. It doesn't matter if they're young or not. They're just people with, their own wishes, and you're helping to bring that out. I think that's a really powerful way of what the work you're doing. I think I want to come back to a couple of things around young people in the world of business, and also maybe explore role modeling as well. But before we do that, let's take a break. We've talked at length, so let's take a break here, and then we'll come back and explore some of those topics. Finding and hiring great leaders is crucial for your organization's success. But how do you identify and attract the right talent? Well, join us for our next live LinkedIn webinar on Tuesday, September the 10th, to hear from Gary Wills, founder of Talent Today, as we hear his thoughts and experiences in how to hire the right leaders for your organization. Full details are on our LinkedIn page and on our website, so check it out and sign up now. See you there. Welcome back, everyone. As I was saying before the break, we were discussing at length with Magdelene about young people's ability to achieve whatever they want to achieve, and some nice stories of people that she's worked with, young people that she's worked with, and things they've been achieving. And I thought we can now move the conversation on a bit and explore a bit about role models firstly.
Important stuff,
yeah. And I think maybe it'll be useful to hear from you, Magdelene, around how important are role models in the work that you do with young people, and what impact can they create?
Role models are very important, but as you asked that question, the first thing that popped into my mind was a TEDx I listened to by this wonderful speaker, and her name is literally just full of my head. And she talks about the danger of the single story. And when you think of role models, you assume that these are people who are positive role models, who are living life in a very exemplary way and showing the best way for people to do so. And when we begin to put our hopes and pins on certain individuals, and if they do something negative, it can have an impact. So for me, having a role model is very important for young people in the world of business, in any world. It's very, very important. But also, just like this speaker said, we should be very mindful about the single story, that we're seeing them through rose-tinted glasses. We must understand that these are people who might have gone through adversity and have come out the other side. It wasn't easy. They went for all the challenges, but they were committed to whatever their cause was, and they've come out the other side, and they're still striving to achieve what it is that they've set out to achieve. So once that information is put out there, when a young person is looking up to anybody as a role model, and that role model happens to fall for whatever reason, or something happens, he or she doesn't, and I thought you were like this. They understand that this person is also a human being and is prone to any form of mistakes or anything that could happen. So it's important that when we talk about role models, we do not just see it from the single story.
And it's an interesting one, as you said, right? We're all human, and I think it's a part of the reflection that we reflect on the role models we have. I find it quite interesting to see young people when they take these role models in the public eye. And they show themselves to the fullest in terms of, if you take a footballer or another famous person, I think the media is definitely trying to find ways to dig out dirt. And it's not helpful for role modeling, but then again, it's the reality of us being human. So from your point, Magdelene, the young people you're working with, what are the role models in terms of leadership that they're taking that you yourself find very positive and helpful in their journey?
So, one we've been talking about him for so many times, he's always popping into my head, Stormzy. So where we are in our neck of the woods, this is where Stormzy grew up. He was born and bred in the Thornton Heath area in Croydon. And so his name comes up a lot. I know many people talk about him. And Stormzy was, his story is a bad boy done good, and he's now a worldwide recognized musician. So when we think of the role models, so we talk about Stormzy, and in recent times, less than 2 months ago, he recently opened up a studio and a football arena for young people not too far from where we are right now, actually, for young people to be able to go in and have all these facilities. So Stormzy is somebody that is always been spoken about. He's somebody that the young people look up to and admire, that, okay, if Stormzy can do this, he came from all those things that when you think of in terms of negativity, and look at where he is right now, then I can also do so. So we start off the discussion with looking at the life of Stormzy, but we don't stop at that, because at the end of the day, I made reference to mom earlier on. Mom can also be a role model at home. She may not be celebrated nationally and internationally, but she's trying her best, because most of the time with the young people we deal with is only mom at home. she's also trying to ensure that she puts food on the table and a roof over their heads.
I don't live too far either, actually. So I'm in Norbury, SW16. So I know, is it Murky HQ or Murky FC? Which one is it? I can't remember now. What he set up.
Murky FC.
Murky FC. That's it. That's the one. Yeah, I saw the launch video. It was pretty impressive. I mean, he's created a whole new community center with grass pitches, or astro pitches. Sorry.
Yeah.
And it's pretty impressive stuff. So, and I suppose, that's a clear role model for a lot of young people, of someone who's made it, literally. I mean, to the extent that he's even gifting scholarships, I think, to Oxford students as well. He's doing stuff like that.
Yes.
He's involved in book publishing, I think.
As well, yes.
Yeah.
Murky
I mean, he's
Publishing.
Murky Pub, that's it. Yeah, so fantastic work, really fantastic. And we do have some listeners outside the UK, sorry. So if you're listening from outside the UK, this is a very UK centric reference.
Quite indeed. We'll have to put some links in.
We'll put some links, or check out Stormzy, and you'll see all the amazing community work he does, aside from his music success. So that's a great example of a role model. I was wondering, I suppose, the adverse, and I just wanted to give you an anecdote, maybe both of you as well. I was coaching a young person fairly recently, and one of the questions that as part of my coaching work, I will ask about, especially with young people, is about role models that they have in their life. And I try to make it as open as possible, as broad as possible, because for some people, role models can be fictional. They don't have to be real. They could be a fictional character that has inspired them or does inspire them. For other people, it's familial. It's someone in their family, a mom, a dad, or older brother, older sister, someone like that, right? Or an uncle even. So I tried to make the question as broad as possible and ask that person, who in your life would you consider a role model? And I've never experienced this before. This was quite shocking to me. The response was, I don't have anyone. And I tried various different, ways to invite him to think about it. And he could not think of a single role, or he didn't want to share with me any role model that he thought of that inspired him in his life. I felt quite sad about that, and I don't know why, and I still can't resolve that in my head about that interaction. And I don't know. I'll ask both of you: where does that come from? What is it that could have happened for that person, or has that happened to you, Magdelene? I don't know, where you've come across any young folks you work with where they actually struggle to identify a role model. I don't know. Is that common?
I've not necessarily come across it. So the question, that's why I made reference to mom. That same question and the responses has been mom, majority of the time.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting.
Because of the fact, so I know maybe some of your listeners are saying, okay, what about the dads? I'm not saying dads are not there, but some of the young people that we work with, it's mainly moms in the house, and dad is unfortunately not in the scene, or dad is the perpetrator. So dad is in and out of the scene. Right. So that's why mom has been that constant figure there. So it's predominantly mom. But in terms of this young man you've spoken about, I think for me, where that comes from is that feeling of hopelessness when the person feels that there's nothing to live for, and there is nothing they feel like their life is just there. There's nothing good, nothing to strive for. Then you don't have any hope. There's no hope, because hope is you're hoping on something. But if there is nothing that you feel that you can achieve, no sense of worth, no sense of any form of joy or happiness, then for me it's quite worrying, because that then it tells me that if care is not taken, that young person or those individuals would be going down a very, very deep and hollow pathway that can only lead to destruction.
Well, it's this is quite serious, I think, and not having any purpose, like you say, is something that I wouldn't wish upon anyone. Although, as Arif said, Arif, you were surprised that the young person said that they struggle to find a role model in their life. And in fact, I had situations, if you were to ask me when I was young, I would struggle to name someone. We're not all blessed by being a part of a community, being surrounded by positive role models. Sometimes we just have to find our way. Sometimes we just have to find it later in life. Sometimes you take a fictitious character. I remember for me, it's like, for as silly as it is, but even Captain Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek was a role model for me at one point when it comes to when I was developing myself as a leader. And it all shapes you in a certain way, right? It's all about searching. But I'm wondering, like, Magdelene, for your wonderful work, right? The wonderful person you are, and if anyone wants to hear Magdalene's stories, it's also on YouTube. What about yourself? Who was your inspiration to do all this wonderful work?
Who was my inspiration? I would say, looking back now, I didn't realize it at that time, but actually looking back from the formative years, it had to be my parents, because looking back, I saw the strive that they took, everything that they did in order to ensure that we and myself and sibling had a better future. And even at the time when I did fall pregnant, and my mom especially was extremely upset, and everything she said and did, it wasn't coming from a place of hate that I thought it was. But looking at it now as a parent, I understand the pain that she went through and the dreams and the aspirations that she had for me. And falling pregnant, she felt like, oh my God, the world has ended. This child is not going to achieve it. So I now fully appreciate everything that they did. My mom is no longer with us, but my dad is around, and I fully understand and appreciate it. And even the times, because my dad is a minister of the is a minister of the gospel from the church. So even at the time when he started the church over 20 odd years ago, when he would get me, I was his unpaid unpaid PA, and he would get me to be typing out his messages, and he writes like a doctor. You cannot read his writing. And I would do all the typing, and he would print it out, and he would shout and scream, "What is this?" and all the likes. And I was like,
gosh.
"Oh my God, I don't understand your writing." But now I appreciate it because of the fact that what that was teaching me was at least knowing how to operate Word. That's the basic thing, at least. But also being able to know how to conduct yourself and have people around you, have a team, and know how best to work with a team. So I appreciate all of these things now.
No, yeah, it's fascinating and it also shows how our relationships with our parents evolve over time, and they do change. I can relate to that as well. It's fascinating. With the remaining time that we've got left, I think, Magdalene, it'd be useful to explore. So a lot of our listeners come from leadership roles themselves that they occupy, but also, from a HR or learning development background, and they're involved in, developing leaders in their own organization. So with that bit of context, I think your experiences working with young people are just fascinating. They're just really inspiring as well. And I wondered, when we're looking at organizations who are bringing young people in, and nowadays, for example, apprenticeships is a huge topic, right? It's one of the key entry points for young people to get into business, to get into a world of work, where previously it was, it was most likely coming from universities. Now we've got a much more diverse entry point into the world of work. You've got all that happening. What would you say to someone in HR or someone in talent who's bringing young people in, and they're looking at how they can develop them into leaders in an organizational context? What are the kind of things you would say to them in terms of how they can go about doing that in the most effective way?
3 things come to mind: EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion.
Nice.
Understand that young people are human beings. They may just, the only thing is they're young people. And just like that chief exec, just like that HR exec who is at the top of the food chain, at one point, you also had to start from somewhere. And so my role as working with young people has helped me in so many ways that I am now called upon to deliver training and coaching sessions to these chief execs, to these HR top professionals, and these are not young peoples, helping them to understand what it means to be a leader. So we need to understand what equality means. It's not just about ticking the boxes. We need to understand what inclusion means. What we need to understand what diversity means. Once we understand it and break it down to its most simplest of forms, we're able to better work and equip young people. Young people come in with such skill sets that needs time to be pruned and cultivated. But at its raw form, if you're able to tap into it and give them the opportunity and the platform to grow, but help them to understand what the culture of the workplace is, you will get a young person who will become the best that you've ever thought he or she could be. Remember, I said something earlier on. It's about relationship. Once you've been able to develop a relationship with that young person in a professional manner, obviously when you're in a workplace, nothing untowards. But when you're able to develop a proper relationship with that young person, you begin to have mutual respect for each other and understand that we are all in it together. We all come together to this particular workplace because we have a common goal. And that common goal is to achieve whatever the goal of the organization is. So we must work together as co-equals in that sense, irrespective of whatever our titles are, irrespective of whatever our paychecks is. It doesn't make us more of a human than anybody else.
Nice. I do like that. Thank you for sharing that. There was one other question I forgot to ask you. I need to ask before we end the episode, which is going back to the role model bit, because there is a certain irony about, we talked about role models, but I wonder for yourself, you've won numerous accolades, awards yourself in the work you do. You're well respected in your own community and amongst your peers, I'm sure, Magdelene. So do you realize you're a role model yourself to the young people that you're working with?
I laugh because I talk about it, but then I don't.
Yeah.
I'm just being me. I'm just being Magdelene. That's what
I know.
I'm saying.
But there must be something about, I mean, do you, okay, now I've mentioned that you've laughed about it and you've maybe increased your self-awareness about it a bit, but do you carry that weight with you? Does that affect things? Do people mention it? Do the young people, you work with, do they treat you differently? I'm just curious. How does it affect you?
It doesn't affect me in any sense that it comes to my head and I begin to think of myself more than anybody else, because obviously I'm talking about this. But it does make me more conscious and aware of how I do things and how I conduct myself, both in a professional setting and in a personal setting. It's that consciousness that you carry with you all the time.
And I think that's a leadership lesson anyway. TK, what do you think? Go on.
Well, I think, the being able to show up in a way that's congruent and in a way that's authentic, whenever you're a role model or not, it is quite important. But I think just to sum up, I think my impression and my maybe, not a summary, but the thing that I'm getting from all of that is how important formative years are for everyone up as a leader, right? How, we talk about people's background, we talk about all of it, but Magdalene's work is an example of working with people when they form and when they are able to form with role models such as our wonderful guests, they can have a chance to become leaders that we're all talking about here.
Brilliant. Thank you, TK. That's a beautiful summary. I don't know, Magdelene, do you have any closing thoughts or words before we wrap up the episode? Just final piece of advice for our listeners out there?
The only advice I would say is that beware of the single story. I found out the name is Chimamanda Adichie.
Thank you.
Beware of the single story, one. Second of all, understand that as a leader, the responsibility must start with you. You need to be able to task yourself in a private sense. If you're true to yourself privately, then you are qualified to class yourself as a leader publicly.
Nice. Yeah. Nice. Love it. That's beautiful. Well, that's all we've got time for. I just want to thank you sincerely, Magdelene. It's been an inspiring 45 minutes or so listening to you, talking to you. I've learned a lot. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us. Thank you, TK, for being our co-host as always. And we'll see you all at our next episode very soon. And please, if you haven't already, do like or subscribe. And do leave us a review because it always helps us with the algorithm as well.
Yes, and check out Magdalene's charity. Definitely.
Please do. Yes, Music Relief. Google that, and we'll probably put the links in the episode description.
We shall.
Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.